12 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few running backs I would bench this week. The first guy, Myles Gaskin of the Miami Dolphins. So Myles Gaskin, he hasn't really had that great of a season, in my opinion, this year. I know he's had a couple good games the last 2 out of 3 weeks here. Week 9 versus Houston, 34 yards rushing, a touchdown, 6 catches, 23 yards, and a fumble loss. Week 10 versus Baltimore, 14 carries, 31 yards, and a catch for 14 yards. And then week 11 at the Jets, pretty decent game, 23 carries, 89 yards, 3 catches, 7 yards, and a touchdown. But this week here, very tough matchup for Myles Gaskin versus the Carolina Panthers that give up the second least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. And right here, I could see a ball game where the Panthers get off to a pretty decent start in this one, and they got to play catch up and throw the footballs to a Tagovailoa and this Dolphin offense. So Gaskin here, he could either have a big game or a dud performance. And this week here, I don't think he's going to do much in this one. And if I got better options, I definitely would bench him in week 12. The second running back's Darrell Henderson of the Los Angeles Rams. So Henderson, it's been a pretty decent year for him this year, but the last couple games have been mediocre to poor games for Henderson. Week 9 versus Tennessee, 11 carries, 55 yards, 3 catches, 3 yards. And week 10 at the 49ers, 5 catches, 31 yards, and 4 catches for 10 yards. So we know Henderson, he ain't a big receiver out of the backfield here for the Rams. And even the balls he catches, he's only getting 2 or 3 yards per catch on little dump offs. So right here, another tough matchup in week 12 at the Green Bay Packers that give up the 8th least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. In this ball game, I think it's going to be on Matthew Stafford in this one to try to win it for his team. I could see this Packer team pretty much shut down Henderson for the most part, and it wouldn't surprise me if he only has 60 or 70 total yards in this one. So this week, I think Henderson's a running back I would get away from and bench. The next running back's Josh Jacobs of the Las Vegas Raiders. So the Raiders go into Dallas this week here on Thanksgiving Day. And Josh Jacobs, it's been a pretty decent season for him. A couple big games here and there, and then some light work games. Week 9 at the Giants, 13 carries, 76 yards, 4 catches, 19 yards. Week 10 versus Kansas City, 7 carries, 16 yards, 5 catches, 20 yards. And Week 11 versus Cincinnati, 9 carries, 37 yards, and 5 catches, 24 yards. So he's another running back like Henderson. That's not much of a receiver out of the backfield. And the balls he is catching as well is only 3 to 5 yards per catch for Jacobs. And this could be a ball game where the Dallas Cowboys get off to a huge lead like we've seen sometimes during the season. And then teams just got to throw all day. So right here, the Cowboys also give up the 4th least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. So right here, it might be tough sledding for Jacobs. His biggest game of the season wasn't all that great, 17 fantasy points. And right now, he's 8 to 10 a week for the last couple weeks. But I would bench him this week, especially if the Cowboys get off to a hot start. He's not pretty much going to do anything, in my opinion. The next running back's Alex Collins of the Seattle Seahawks. So Collins looks like he's going to be the bell cow running back over there. Him and Rashard Penny, if he's healthy for the remainder of the season, after Chris Carson went down with season-ending neck surgery that they pretty much prolonged anyway over there in Seattle. And with them not pretty much in the hunt right now, Collins should be the man over there. In the last couple weeks here, he's been non-existent for fantasy owners. Week 8 versus Jacksonville, 10 carries, 44 yards. Week 10 at Green Bay, 10 carries, 41 yards, a catch for 8 yards. And last week versus Arizona, 10 carries, 36 yards. So it looks like right now Collins, he's only getting about 10 to 12 touches per game here for the Seattle Seahawks team. And that's not going to get the job done. I know he's got a pretty decent matchup on Monday Night Football at the Washington football team that gives up the 14th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. But after a limited amount of touches the last few games, and obviously not the greatest of matchups as well the last few weeks here, and game script not going the Seahawks' way, it's going to be tough to trust Collins, in my opinion. So he's better off on the bench. If he breaks out, then maybe he's a running back you could consider for the upcoming weeks to start. But this week here, it's too risky to start him, in my opinion. And the 5th and final running back I will bench this week, Devonta Foreman of the Tennessee Titans. So Adrian Peterson, he got cut this week here. And Foreman, he's really the only true in-between the tackle runner now for this Titan team until, obviously, Derrick Henry returns. I know they got Hilliard, who had a breakout game, but he's a third down and receiving back. And Jeremy McNichols, the same thing as Hilliard. So Foreman, he did get dropped in 12% of fantasy leagues, which is a little far-fetched in my opinion, especially that Peterson got cut and he's the only real running back between the tackles like I mentioned. So the last few weeks here for Foreman since he signed with the Titans. Week 9 at the Rams, 5 carries, 29 yards. Week 10 versus the Saints, 11 carries, 30 yards, and 2 catches, 48 yards. And last week versus Houston, just the way the game went, he couldn't get much into it. 7 carries, 25 yards, and a catch for 15 yards. So this week, a tough matchup at the Patriots here, who, like I mentioned, they were all about defense in their running game. And I think their main thing is going to be stopping the run and make Ryan Tannehill try to beat him, which can make him one-dimensional. And that's where the turnovers come to play and the inconsistent play for Tannehill. So right here, I know Foreman's most likely the number one over there here for Tennessee. But with a tough matchup at New England, he's definitely a running back I would shy away from and bench this week. So that's a few running backs I would bench here in Week 12 of the fantasy football season.